Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Design Hustle Podcast. This is your host, Ali. I just got done speaking with Charlie Claxton, the Senior Vice President and the Global Head of Design for Thomson Reuters, and ex Amazon Head of User Experience Design. We spoke about a lot of interesting things like leading design teams, building a design culture at your company, navigating complexity in product development, and designing a successful career. Without further ado, this is what he had to say.
We interrupt this program to bring you the Design Hustle Podcast, conversations around successful design journeys. Take it away, Ali.
Charlie Claxton, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
We've like I generally try not to have a long conversation before starting this, but with you it was a challenge because there were so many things to talk about, and I just looked at the time, and we've been talking for like 10 minutes already. So I'm going to jump right into this. So how would you introduce yourself to a non-designer who doesn't know what design is, who doesn't know what product is, and so forth?
Yeah, I tell them that I often build and launch products, either consumer products or business B2B products. So things that you would interact with in and day out as part of your life is some interface on something that you've bought or, video or whatever the thing happens to be, that front end experience that you engage with. That's the area that I sit in.
That's really interesting. So, when you tell this to a designer, I'm sure what's the follow-up question? Like, do you then go and give an example like, oh, do you know about Alexa? Do you know about, let's say, I don't know, something from your portfolio? Do you directly go there or?
It often depends on the level of the designer I'm spending time with and what are their background and what they're looking for. I have a very kind of a long history in the design space. I've designed on a lot of different interfaces and products and experiences. And so if the individual is asking, it happens to be an information architect, we could spend a little bit of time in that space. My strength is not in the strong visual design or brand space. I'm more on the complex application side, understanding customer mental models, defining the jobs to be done and building mechanisms to, track progress towards those things in design. So I really figure out when I'm talking to a designer or anyone in the creative field is, how can I relate to the things that they're possibly doing that will help them understand a little bit about where I sit. I call it on the UX continuum, right? There's a bunch of these user experiences where like a catch-all phrase for a bunch of people, a bunch of types of individuals. That's a very generalist space, but there are people that lean interaction design, information architecture, content design, visual design, because a little continuum and I can help explain where I'm at in that lifestyle.
That's great. I think that's a great answer. It works probably for designers. They sort of understand what you do because I think once you've done so much, then you need to sort of focus on this one elevator pitch, right? So how do you explain what do you do now?
Yeah, so I lead the front end for all the experiences for a company called Thomson Reuters. I have a team of about between 325 to 350 or so, spread across seven countries. Um, I own almost the entire front end experience for all the products, our digital experience as well. So the .com, self-service, all of those pieces. I have a bunch of different roles in my organization. So I have UX content design, UX designers, UX researchers. I have the accessibility team. I have UX engineering. I have producers, which are, think of them as like design product managers. They understand the user-centered design methodology and the things that we need to do to deliver. I own the design system, also the design system for our AI playbook and our AI frameworks that we're rolling out across our products. And so it's a broad remit, and there's aspects usually when I spend time with the designers on my team or the engineers on my team or people that I'm meeting that are not on my team, they're actually outside and want to spend time. There's always some aspect of their career or their life that I've either done or I have teams that do.
That is very cool. Like I don't know how you find time to do anything else because uh, 350 people across 7 countries. Like I don't know how you manage that even because that's such a tall task, and especially when it comes to designers
we're a sensitive lot. It's easy to offend us because and
Yeah.
a lot of things are like wishy-washy. So
Yeah.
design is still like on the in the gray area, right?
Yeah.
So
I think the big thing is like I can actually do every role that's in my organization. I can hand code. I mean, you shouldn't ship my code, but I can hand code. I can do the visual. I can do all the pieces that are there. And the best thing is you build a team by hiring people that are way better than you are. But if you have experience in the space that you're hiring the people for, it helps you to connect. It helps them to understand that you've been in their shoes before. You know what to experience. You know where their challenges are. And my job as a leader is to create an environment for people to grow, people to get better, people to learn and be curious, unblock them so that they can be successful, give them that podium when they do have a success so they can, you know, enjoy all of the stuff that comes from doing great deliveries. And then I own every one of their mistakes. And this way they can accidentally mess up or fail or whatever happens in a safe environment because they know that I'll take the fall for it. And so in order to run and build a team of this size, so when I first took over, and maybe we can spend a little time on my background, but if we just started the journey of Thomson Reuters, I was poached out of Amazon, and it was to build their first centralized design organization. And we started with a team of about 120-ish, mostly functional, mostly, I need you to do this. Can you move that over there? And it was about 3 major cities in North America and a couple little satellite groups. Through sort of adjusting the teams and sort of, natural selection where people realize this is where they want to be or they want to move on, or it's a great opportunity for them to try a different experience at a different company. Team got down to about 60 people as we then started our massive rebuild. At one point I hired 160 in a year. That's where we ended up in, close to 300 and, change as the team. I built out Toronto from 0 to 90. I built out Mexico City from 0 to about 20, 25 or so. I've got, a dozen or so in London. We built out. I've got teams for acquisitions in India, in Sweden. Rebuilt Minneapolis, St. Paul, built out a bunch of different groups in my Dallas office, in my Ann Arbor office. And the only way to really do that is to, one, you build a set of mechanisms that allow you to understand and help the team make great decisions. And you also use those mechanisms to sort of disseminate information so that people are always aware of what's going on and always apprised of what decisions are being made. And I introduced the writing culture into my organization. It's the same thing that I learned during my time at Amazon. And that allows me to teach, you teach your teams to think the way you do, especially your direct leadership. And that allows you to scale because you can essentially have a small group of people that are able to go on your behalf into meetings and make decisions and do the things. And they'll probably come to the same outcome that you're going to have because they think and operate in the same way that you are. So you may not like the outcome of the meeting, but you realize that you probably were going to get the same outcome. And then it allows me to have that structure and the writing culture so they can give me updates and what's going on so that when I go to bed, other, countries are coming up and they're starting with their morning coffee and they're starting to deliver. And then when they go to bed, I can see some documentation of like what's going on, where we're at, what we need to do. And that's really the only way to build and scale a team at that size.
that is amazing. So this leads me to believe that this idea of dealing with complexity, maybe playing around with these multiple variables per se, it's something that you were born with, something that you learned over the years. So can you take us back to a point where you think is the right point to start? So probably where you're from, and how were you a curious child? Were you a designer, artist, musician, singer?
Yeah. So, all right. So let's go back. I'm from the United States. I was born in New York, Port Jefferson, Long Island, a couple different cities on the East Coast. Did most of my formative years in Missouri. My dad got a job in that area, so moved us out. I did my undergrad at University of Missouri Columbia in the School of Journalism. Surprisingly, advertising was the route I was going at the time. There really wasn't much in the route of design. So I didn't really know what I was going to do. You know, you're either a fine artist or you did advertising. You could do architecture, but it really wasn't. It wasn't big at the school that I was in. And so what I wound up doing is taking some of these evening classes. A bunch of these Adobe products were just starting to come out, and it was kind of neat to sort of date me a little bit. When I learned Photoshop, they had just come out with layers, right? And the type tool, once you committed the type, like you wrote the sentence and you hit enter, that was it. You couldn't change it. And so a couple years back, I learned a bunch of those things. I graduated and I wanted to live on the West Coast. So I packed up a U-Haul. I had my little pet lizard in the back seat, and we drove across to Seattle. And I had no job. I had no idea how I was going to pay for this rent. The goodbye from my parents almost felt like a little like, we'll see you next week. You know, I was like, we're going to make this happen. And so I settled in Seattle, and about 2 weeks later, I got picked up by a headhunter.
So
And this
sorry,
head,
Charlie, was this after you'd graduated?
yeah,
You'd done your studies,
hmm
and you're like, okay, time to make a change now. Follow your dreams, passions, and you drive across.
yeah. And I don't, my dreams were, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I got my degree in advertising. I had taken these evening classes in addition to my regular studies and this design applications. I thought this could be cool. And so, yeah, and the only thing I thought is like, I'd like to see what living on the West Coast is like. And so, yeah, I just drove out there. And at the time, you know, I was learning how to hand code some sites, and I had built this online portfolio, which, you know, was mostly just doodling around creative stuff. I didn't have any clients. I had worked at an agency while I was in school. And so I did a little bit of work with the Smithsonian and the St. Louis Science Center that this client had, but it was a part-time job. So I had a little bit of taste of what creative. There was some bubbling up of the 3D software that was starting to get, you could possibly buy it, or you could be at a school that would buy it and you could play around with it. That was really all I had. When I parked in Seattle, about 2 weeks later, I got picked up by this headhunter that placed me on the Connection by Boeing project. And so I was part of the team that actually built the world's first high-speed in-flight internet. And so think about, you know, servers on a plane, you know, antennas on the top, speaking to satellites down to transponders on the ground. And, you know, if you've ever used internet on a plane, that came from the team that I was a part of. We built this up, and eventually at some point a lot of the leaders had sort of splintered off, and so GoGo is one of the people I used to work with was running that company. Emerset had their technology company, people I worked with there, and so we sort of all did our own little thing, and I was responsible for a lot of the tools that sent content to the plane. So think of it as like a CMS on steroids, and an FTP on steroids at the same time, right? This ability to manage in-flight content at different levels to have sort of co-branding experiences. I did that for a couple years, about 6 years or so, and then wanted to see what an agency was like. So I worked at an agency for just a few months because I wanted to see how agency ran. And my dream was to start my own agency. And so at one point I thought I could do this myself. So I quit and I started my own agency, and I landed Amazon as my first customer. And so Amazon was a great experience. I have no way of actually verifying this, so that I was told by the people that brought me to Amazon that my firm was the first certified UX design firm for Amazon, in their system.
Wow.
I would love to be able to actually see that in there to say, yep, they were right. They weren't just telling me that, but I'll take their word for it because they got me through the system. They got me in, and I was able to do a bunch of great projects. I subsequently landed Microsoft, Qualcomm, Starbucks, T-Mobile. I've done applications for dental practices. I did Core OS applications for Brew mobile platform for Qualcomm. We did a bunch of stuff for Microsoft and their global marketing operations, their suite of products, and the Windows Phone experiences. And that was a fun ride. We built it up to about just shy of $2 million a year in revenue before bringing it with a development partner, and then did that for a little bit and then left. I
Sorry,
picked up.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
So when you had built up your own agency, the whole idea was to have that liberty of like, doing your own stuff and this idea of working with other people. And then someone like Amazon comes along, knocks on the door. So that means you cannot do anything else because it's such a huge client. Because eventually, did they sort of buy you in, pull you in, and say like, "Hey, just join us, right? Why don't you just?"
Well, it didn't happen exactly like that. So they did, they reached out, had showed interest in a project that they had, and I was able to land them as the client. uh, what's interesting, you go into building an agency because the idea is like you want to design and build the stuff that you've always wanted to do. And it's quick, you quickly move into this mode of like feeding the beast, right? You start hiring people, you've got office space that you have to pay for, you have, all of this expenses start building up. And at one point we were, well over a dozen and a half people. And then I had a bunch of development partners that we bring in for projects, and we were running at a burn rate of probably 120 to 150,000 US dollars a month. And so, and what's interesting about an agency is you're technically out of business every 3 months. So there's sort of a life cycle from I meet the client, I learn about a potential project, I make the bid, and then at some point we'll kick off the project. And there's still the first month of work, and before you can send an invoice, after the first month, you're on a 30, 60, 90-day billing cycle to get paid back. And then you sort of realize the project that you signed is a 3-month gig of work. Like you sort of said 3 to 6 months. You maybe get lucky and get a good year-long project, but that's typically the size. So that becomes the engine, like every month. And we sort of did a calculation. I started bringing on business partners and building the teams out. And then we would realize that it's about 50 outreaches lands one client. So you have 50 outreaches, 20, 25 or so will respond. Of those, maybe 10 will actually be interested to have a meeting. Of the 10, 5 have a project. Of the 5, you land one. And so you kind of figure out like, I've got to get 50 a day going out so that I get bites. And it becomes quickly not the thing that you wanted to do, right? What you wanted to do was build out something where you get to do something really creative and solve problems with clients. And what happens is you become the face that's getting work to feed the engine behind you that is building and doing all the stuff that you're like, man, I'd love to design on that, right? But if you design on that, then you're not out meeting new clients and doing new things to get people excited. When I brought it together with a development partner, at that point, I was sort of done. I just wanted to try something different. And as being a consultant, there's pluses and minuses. One of the biggest challenges with the consultant is that you don't really own anything. You don't own the success. You don't really, you own all the failures, and you don't get to see everything through. And so there's a craving to go be in an organization to say, I started this, I launched it, it went well, and here was the success. Or I started this and I launched it and it tanked, and here's what I learned, right? So at that point, I'd reached out to a couple of friends that were at Amazon that I had spent time with during my years running the agency. And at that point, we went to lunch and talked about what it was like. And next thing I know, I was working in AWS. It's a head of user experience for one of the divisions. And so there I was brought on to help turn one of Jeff Bezos' pet projects profitable. It was this group called Amazon Mechanical Turk, and it's a 2-sided marketplace for workers and requesters on the concept of microtasks. And Jeff has this sort of long runway before his expectations of profitability starts to kick in, typically 10 to 12 years, about the time that I was there. And this was getting towards, year 11, like, let's figure something out. So I was brought onto the leadership team there to figure out how do we do this. Did that for 2 years, and I went over to Amazon's selling partners. So if you think of all of the products that show up on .com, .uk, .eu, all around the world, come through a set of tools that sellers, add and manage their inventory and write all the descriptions and say what's in which warehouses and set pricing and all of that. I was everything but fulfillment. So think of the actual shipping process itself. That part I was not a part of. And I did that for about 2 years, and that was a lot of fun. Launched their first design system for Amazon selling partners, launched their first third-party app store for that group, API developer portal. I did that, and then I wanted to try my hand at voice and hardware. Never done that before, and I went over to Alexa Everywhere. So think of it as adding Alexa on third-party devices.
Mhm.
So everything that Amazon doesn't build, right? So Sonos, Fitbit, Bose, Facebook portals, um, all of the different devices that you would put a Alexa experience on. And I was about at the time I was helping them write, which is called our operational planning, which is what are we going to do next year for the business. I was writing that with a business partner, and I got a call from a headhunter about Thomson Reuters. And that call sort of kicked off this chain of events of meetings and interviews. And they had a really fascinating problem to solve. And we can get into that in more details if you're interested. But that is what moved me from Seattle to Zurich, Switzerland. And I've been out here for about 4 years now.
Wow, that's really inspiring. You're the second person I'm talking to from Amazon this week. She was Amazon Berlin. And it's quite interesting. Everyone that I've met from the design team has good things to say about the design culture. But a lot of people I meet from the development team have a different cultural sort of take on what the feeling is like as a developer at Amazon. But I feel like the designers have done really well in that respect to create like this culture in a big organization, because I worked with big organization, and the biggest problem is to have this unified culture where, as you said, all parts of the systems, yes, they're part of their own responsibility, but not always the blame. So the blame game, and how these systems are designed in a way where maybe there's design ops properly implemented, where at every end there are systems that are in place to not make people accountable, but to make people feel safer to document their design decisions. Because I felt like there could be like this sword hanging on top of you. It's like, oh, who said what in a meeting, and who took those decisions, and how, so how were you able to, we're still on Amazon right now, just a very quick thing before we move on to Reuters. So how were you able to get into a culture that was already there and then add your bit to it?
That's a great question. Well, let's also remember the timing that I came into Amazon. So I started my agency around 2006-ish or so. They were kind of a splintered in a handful of different random buildings in the Seattle area. They'd rent a floor in one skyscraper. They would rent 2 floors across town in another building, sort of a little all over the place. When I then joined, it was a little bit after they started to congregate in a set of the buildings down in what's considered South Lake Union. It was about 25,000 people in Seattle at the time, and probably 50, 75,000 worldwide. And that includes like everything. By the time I left, there were over 1 million. So you think about the expanse of growth. I think they also, live and breathe the leadership principles at the organization. Bias for action, are right a lot, challenge and commit. These are all, you get interviewed on them, your promotions are based on them, your performance reviews are based on them. And they have a very, very tight ship of mechanisms that allow them to run and scale as fast as they do. I was there during the time when there were some rough articles and rough stories about what it was like to work at Amazon. I was fortunate. I never experienced that stuff. I didn't experience any of the things that made their way into articles, the way that people talked about what it was like to be there. I was very fortunate. I had some amazing bosses that I got to work with. And I think that's really sort of your make or break. When you look at the teams and look what's going on, I tend to find that bad cultures, bad structures are often to be tied somewhere into the leadership space, right? And so when you've got a company the size of Amazon, right, it's not hard to find an amazing team that you would love to work with and a toxic team you want nothing to do with, right? And so I always tell people like get multiple perspectives. I think when you look at the design community, we spent a lot of energy building out a great design culture, but it was still a very tech engineering heavy organization. And so there was a lot of sort of fighting to get your voice heard and get your seat at the table. And design grew up a lot during that time, right? And we started to see customer behaviors for products that had a stronger design culture, for products where there was really the three-legged stool with product design and engineering working together to deliver great solutions. That resonated with customers, right? And we saw it in our numbers, we saw it in the satisfaction, we saw it in our ability to innovate. And those that were in a more toxic environment where there was either a massive imbalance in the three-legged stool, or a culture of not working well together, which by the way is very visible when you're in Amazon, right? We all know which teams are those, and you see that on the external product. You see that on the areas where there's a little bit of friction. And because of that, I think that's where you get more and more teams have gotten better and stronger at working together at Amazon, because Amazon's a very data-driven organization. And so you can look at it and go, well, if we work well together and everyone is marching in the same direction, there's a positive customer outcome. If we don't, well, we know what that outcome looks like, right? And we're all driven at Amazon to deliver great experiences, not for Amazon. We deliver great experiences for the customer, right? And we optimize Amazon so that we can get better at delivering those things for customers.
That's an awesome answer. Thank you so much for that. That gives me a lot of hope in terms of like how organizations are structuring the cultural aspect, because I've found like again I'm a very pro culture person. I think it's not about the output at the end of the day, what you're doing, but it's who you're doing it with and what it means to all
Yeah.
of us as a team, right? So, and design is something that you don't own completely. It's like bits and pieces that you're doing of a much bigger thing, right? And so it's not about one screen that someone is working on, or the head of VAR or the design system team. It's very easy to blame people, but
Yeah.
it's very difficult to go in together and then create that. However, now let's talk about your Reuters
Yeah.
move. So this time you probably had more say in building systems and perhaps bringing in the type of people that you wanted from the go, or was it still like you had some legacy that you took over and then you grew the team?
Yeah, I mean, it's a blend, right? When you join an organization, there's a book, 30, 60, 90 Days. It's a great book to read. And it helps you sort of map out what are your near term, short term, like what you should be working on and focusing on. And then what I typically do is I sort of lump things into three different categories when I join. The stuff that's going really well, like, all right, we're just going to not touch that, let that keep going. There's the stuff that's kind of could be better, could be worse, sort of in the middle. And then there's stuff that's not going well at all. Those are the things you're going to focus on right now. Of the things that are kind of the squishy in the middle, you sort of look at it and go, is there anything that's in there that if I don't adjust or I don't work on is going to cause me a lot of mess down the road? Okay, that stuff needs to move into the bucket of not going well because I need to fix that. And the others, you know what? I'm sorry about that. I got a call.
No worries.
When you look at the parts that are going well, they're maybe not perfect, but they're not going to do a ton of. It's not going to be a ton of damage, right? It may not be the way that you want it. It may not be the things that you're excited about, but you are sort of fine with it. That allows you to sort of focus in your energy and stuff. And when you're doing that, you then start to evaluate the team that you have. And you look at the team and you go, what I need in 3 years, what do I need in 2 years to be successful? What are the people that I have right now and how are they at operating? There are some that you realize that they're struggling, but it's because of the environment that they're in. And so if I put them on a different product or I have a different manager, we sort of see, do they blossom? Now they get a chance with a voice. Those that are doing really well, do they have what you need to be like the next team, the next group that you're going for? And that sort of evaluates where, do you keep certain individuals? Do you exit certain individuals? And then what do you start to build out your structure? I know people often think of, when you exit from an organization or, people part ways with a company. I have worked with individuals who are not doing well at certain companies, and it's just not the right fit, but they were amazing. And you see them go on to another organization and they're like leading big divisions and they're launching great products, right? And I always think too that just because you part ways doesn't necessarily mean that you're not good at what you're doing. It's just that whatever the environment happens to be isn't the best space for you. If somebody on my team right now says, I'm really excited to get into hardware, well, we don't build hardware at Thomson Reuters. Like, this isn't the place for you. Like, you should go find a company that has a hardware arm to it so that you can start to be around that stuff and see if this is what you want to do. Right. And as a great leader, you have to be willing to part ways sometimes with people who are amazing, but this is not their career path. This is not what they're signing up for, right? Once you have that in place, then you start to figure out, like, what is the optimum structure that allows you to scale. It allows you to drive customer business results at the speed and at the at the impact level that you're hoping to get. And then you look for the right leaders that can bring that together. Sometimes those leaders already exist in your organization, and sometimes you need to hire outside. When you're hiring, your next pace is to look at, do you have a particular hiring strategy? So for me, because I have people in so many different time zones, what I tried to do is put either VP or senior directors or directors relatively in that same office or in that time zone, so that there's a leader that's around that can help that team and can help them grow. And it gives me a little voice in that space. It gives me a spot where I can keep tabs on how things are going. What do I need to do to be successful? What do I need to set up for structure? I rolled out Thomson Reuters first. I was the first group that brought in their entire centralized organization, turned them from functional to strategic. So in doing this, I helped build out this team that sort of crafted where we went as a product. It drove business decisions. It drove like how we approach pieces. They became strategic partners with product and engineering, and really reinforced that three-legged stool. Right now, I'm sort of pivoting from a pod structure to a centralized, decentralized model. And that's also based off of learnings. I think one of the challenges you find when people start to build out stuff is they lack this ability of sort of self-reflection, right? And when you're open and you're curious, and then you're willing to accept when things aren't going well or things are going really well, right? Then you can just even grow better as a leader. And what I often find is people will put something into place and they're so like hell-bent that this is the way we should do it, then they don't witness the areas that are struggling, either the team's struggling, they're not, wherever the pieces are, and they don't take action. And so every year I sort of have this reflection on the previous year, and I look at what went really well. How do I do more of that? There are times I look at what went really well and go, should we keep doing that? Like, it's working, but I don't know if it's what I need for the next year. And then I look at the stuff that didn't go well, and I think to myself, is there something wrong with what we did there? Right? Do I need to make an adjustment? Or do I look at it and go, it just was not a good idea at all. We should do something different. And each time in each year, I'll either introduce a new mechanism, or I'll introduce a different way of working, or I'll structure the team slightly different so that we can, create more invention in the organization. Like, how do I build out little groups that can help us see around corners, maybe not tied directly to sprints? How do I refine sprint planning so we get more clarity in the design group, so I can sort of map velocity against the stuff that we're doing? All of those little pieces come out from moments of learning from the year before.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you a question here, because so someone who's basically building partners for organizations, right? And putting in these systems, and at the same time, there's always like career paths and people, roles, titles, expectations, and so forth. So I always ask myself this crazy question because I just told you very quickly what my background was: architecture, UX design, startup, storage, like a lot of things, content and stuff. So for me, putting myself in a box is very difficult, right? So for me, it was UX design because people understood it better. For me, it was still trying to solve a problem, and the outcome was different. It could be like pixels. You can do a service design. You can be part of an innovation workshop where you're thinking about the future, possible futures exercise where you integrate AI and so forth. So I'm talking more or less about innovation.
Yeah.
And when it comes to innovation, we don't have any titles for people like me. Let's say there's so many of us, right? And it's like people who want to do interesting things and not just create screens in the end, for example, right? So screens is one of the outputs. So it
Yeah.
could be, yeah, so many other things. So how do you see the future change? Um, what could that role be in organizations like yours and like big organizations that have the capacity to think beyond today?
Yeah. Well, maybe a different approach. I don't like to spin them out as separate pieces because I think uh, designers and creatives in general have an inherent need or a desire to innovate and to create new experiences. Um, and so if you build like, oh, this is my invention group, you're sort of putting a bad mark on the group that's delivering experiences. And then you have this weird sort of line between like, well, that's not on the roadmap, so you shouldn't touch that. That's going to go to the innovation group. And you're stifling the ability to bring more creative thought into the process. So what's better to do is you look for how does everyone get an opportunity in their current day-to-day experience to find ways to create better, cooler experiences for customers, right? And you want to foster that stuff. Um, it was interesting. I rolled out this concept called our Design Dash. And what we did is we did a 2-week sprint. Um, and we picked problems that were related back to our customer experience outcomes framework. And that was a way for us to see across basically jobs to be done across our products where things were causing friction for customers. And some of those were, you know, new design concepts that we need to use to solve problems. Some of them were process things. And I took all of the design pods and we mixed them all up. So I did 2 things with that. One, everyone got a chance to work with somebody new. We had people that had never spent time. When you're at a team of over 300, there's a good possibility you won't know a big chunk of the people in the organization. And so this gives a chance for you to learn with new people to work on. We had at least one subject matter expert still retained. So if it was in one of our particular products that we were going to do something with, 1, possibly 2 people would have been on that product already. And then the rest are all sort of net new people. We'd even have managers change around. We had researchers change. We had accessibility specialists. All these people taking on different roles. We also had where our researchers could try different things. Our producers, some of them got to do some research. Some of our researchers who did foundational research were able to do other sort of contextual studies around this thing. We had UX content designers who got to spend more time in the actual design aspects of it and vice versa. And then we gave them problems to solve. And it was a huge bump in morale for people. It was really, really exciting. It was a chance to try something different, get a better relationship with other people across the organization and invent. But for as many people that were super excited and kind of begged me to do that again, I have an equal number who didn't enjoy that, right? And those people really enjoyed the thing that they work on. That they're not interested in net new stuff. I remember I had friends who, when you live in Seattle, basically everyone on your block is working at the who's who, like your neighbors at Facebook and the other ones at Google, and then there's Microsoft and Amazon and Starbucks, and we're all like literally on the same road. And so I know it sounds kind of neat and exciting when you're outside of the Seattle area. I go to my parents and my family in the Midwest, and they're like, you work for, name your large company. It's like, yeah, and so does everyone in my entire neighborhood. It's not that exciting. And I know people who are in consulting who love this opportunity to try all these different products. And I have other friends I worked on Windows 7 and I'm going to do Windows 8 this year. And I cannot wait to start on Windows 9 next year. Like that is their career. And I know a lot of us look at that and go, shoot me if that's I don't want to do that. And they would die to do my version of the career. And so I'm bringing this up because as you look at innovation may be exciting for you, but also may be exciting for somebody else, but just at a different level. And as a leader, it's how do you find ways so that someone like you who's really excited about innovation gets that as part of their day to day, and others that would like to dip their toes in also get that chance.
So this is where I wanted to sort of dig deep in, because I think within your organization, you can sort of try to make sure that there is no differentiation between the cool crowd and the crowd that just wants a structured system where they just want to do better. So this is the idea that there is inherently a different set of processes involved in thinking from 0 to 1 or from 1 to 1.2, which is optimization, which is excellent, right? There's nothing wrong with optimization. In fact, it is equally as important, if not more, to make systems better and efficient. This leads me to another really interesting thing that I always think about. So, from the US to Switzerland, right? And tell me about that, the feeling that you have, because culturally it's very different. I've got a lot of friends in the US. I've got a lot of friends. I live in Switzerland. How are you dealing with the change of pace, I would say?
Yeah. So let's talk about right before I moved. So we came at sort of the tail end of COVID. I was poached. I just joined Alexa Everywhere, and it was like about 2 months or so in, the lockdown started, right? We weren't able to travel, we weren't able to do things. And so, my family and I were sort of itching for something different. And Seattle area in the Pacific Northwest is beautiful. Mountains and water and hills, and it's just a gorgeous place to live. We had never been to Switzerland even for vacation. So I get this call for this job. And at some point during the interview process, they said, the location is in Zug, Switzerland. I live in Zurich, which is just outside of Zug. And it was this kind of scary adventure, right? We were excited to do something different. My kids were born and raised in the same house in Seattle. We didn't even know what to expect. We didn't know the language. They speak 4 or 5 languages here. We're on the Swiss German side. And so here we go. We take our flight. We each have 2 checked bags and 2 carry-ons, and we had stuff that was sent in shipping containers overseas. We had an air freight container of some of our stuff up to a certain weight amount. And we were lucky that ours came out of a port that wasn't locked down in COVID. I have other friends that have moved out here that were, I think one moved out of Dallas area, and for some reason that port was slower at getting stuff out due to the COVID issues. And so they waited a lot longer before our stuff showed up. And I remember we landed, and as we were sort of coming in over the hills and stuff, it was kind of looking at the houses and looking at the stuff and go, this is going to be home for a couple of years. And so we landed, we get picked up at the airport, and this person dropped us off at the house, and it's like, well, here we go. And we had our bags. And I remember that there was an issue with one of our deliveries for some of our sheets. So we slept on the towels that we had used to stuff around the pots and pans in one of our bags, right? And each, my wife and I slept in one kid's room, and the other kid slept in the other because we're missing some pieces for the master bedroom. And so it was just this sort of rough, weird experience. Anytime you're moving overseas to another location, there's sort of phases of that. There's the honeymoon phase where you're like, this is amazing. We live in Europe. Everyone dreams about retiring out here from the States, and we're doing it. We're doing it at the time when I'm, younger and healthy. Oh man, this is exciting. Now that honeymoon was big for my wife and I. We thought it was great. My kids had to say goodbye to a lot of their friends in order to do this, so they weren't as excited. You go for a couple of months, and then at some point you hit sort of this level of depression, right? You're like, I don't really have any friends. I've got no family out here. I'm watching all my friends do these fun things together. I get on my phone with my family. I see all this stuff happen, and you kind of get this sort of bummed, depressed feeling. Then you start to go, okay, I'm going to figure out travel. And so you realize how open you are to all of Europe. So that becomes your level of excitement. And then you start to meet more people at work, but they're also on the same path as you. And so they come in, and it's hard to get together for the weekend because they're off traveling. They're sort of figuring out what they're going to do. And so it's at that point, you hit about the year or 2 mark, and it's weird. You don't really live here and you don't really live back at the home space that you're at. You're sort of in this limbo land. And you kind of get through that, you sort of get into the movement and culture. I think some of the bigger cultural shocks we found was it's not a consumer driven country. And so this need to sell you stuff all the time isn't here, which in one way is super refreshing. Back in the States, everything's about purchasing. Um, but there's a downside of that out here because when it comes time to get a service or comes time to like stores and things are open, you know, it took a while for us to get used to not having stores open on Sunday. And I really like that now. It's the country looks at it as, you should be with family. You should be doing stuff out, not shopping, not doing whatever. Go explore the mountains. And so that was a great thing. And it forced the European work-life balance on us, which I really needed at that time. But what I really appreciate about Europe is that when you ask somebody, what do you do? It's like, what do they do as a person? Oh, I go on bike rides on the weekend. I like to snowboard in the mountains in the winter, or I play guitar, or, I do woodworking, whatever your thing is, they want to know you, the person. In the States, when you say, what do you do? It's your job. It's the first thing someone says is, here, I work at this company. Here's my title. So it has its plus and minuses as well. So when you're in Europe, though that's amazing, and I would love to have that continue, that what do you do is about you as a person. When it comes to networking, it's hard because they're not really forthcoming on where they work or what they do. They will answer that question for Americans because they know what they mean by they say, what do you do? So it makes networking harder, right? But I like the fact that the focus in Europe is much more as you as the person, not you as the worker doing something. The next thing is like the structure of like how things are so structured here. Right? When you look at the stuff in the States, um, there's a kind of fluidness to, I wouldn't say interactions, but also you can almost get away with whatever you want, right? Here it's like, nope, we do this thing first, and then we do this thing, and then we do this thing, like, and it's in that order. And you come in from the States, you're like, I want to do step 3 first. This is crazy. And they're like, nope, we do step 1 first, and then step 2, right? And just getting used to that sort of rhythm is one that is, it's a very interesting internal fight, right? And then at some point you just realize, look, I'm just going to follow the system. And then you see that it actually works really well. But the American way at the beginning is like, well, I got a better way to do this, right? And they probably do. But, that's not the case all the time out here. So it's been interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you because I've had a huge cultural shock as well. Before I moved to Dubai, I was there for 8 years. Things completely changed. I was born in Pakistan, in a city of 12 million. You can't find a street where there's no one honking the horn, right? And it's loud, it's chaotic. They're like people, it's dust. Everything is full of everything, right? There's someone in everyone else's face all the time, right? Then I moved to Dubai where like everything is tall, and I was doing architecture, and I was in this world completely different, right? And it's all about bling. It was all about showing up. It was all about putting your key on the table to show what car you were driving. That's the culture, right? That's how. And I was like, oh my God, how do you do this? Like, am I doing the right stuff? And I moved to Switzerland where like by that time I had like, oh, I've worked here and there and that. Like you said, right? And then over here is like, oh, we don't talk about all the projects that we work on. Yeah, that's okay. I am, as you said, I am just a designer. And you would see a person with 50 years of experience who would introduce himself as just a designer. And then you start talking. And I love this complexity in Switzerland, I would say, especially because people are so humble. And there's this idea of exploration. And I think that is there as part of their culture where you just can't eat cheese. It's like the layers to eating cheese. You need to understand what cheese is. You need to understand what you're eating it with, what time you're eating it at. Is it with wine? What type of wine? So there are these layers that you can just get into because people have spent so much time in honing their craft. And I feel, as you said, this culture of being very proud of what you do. And this is what I got from this. It's like, okay, I am a designer. I'm very proud of solving problems. What is the best way that I can solve this, right? And this is where this thing came in. Because I'm so different, I don't look the same, I don't talk the same, I don't do the same. That is why having an identity that is easy for the people to put you in a box helps, right? So as when you say like, oh, I am the senior vice president of Thomas Reuters, it's like immediately they would place you, and it's easier for them to approach you. And yeah, just sharing some notes there with you. That's great. I can go on and on with you, Charlie, because this has been really, really helpful, and I'm so really happy that there are companies out there with design divisions working on the cultural aspects of things, because I've worked with people from all nationalities, everywhere. We all have different accents, but we try to speak the same language, right? So and we all try, and the levels, and our language is design, is problem solving, and just we're trying to hear what people have to say.
Yeah.
This podcast is my attempt to bring out people like you. I feel I'm privileged. I have access to people like you. Okay, great. Let's share this session with everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, I think it's, I always say happy people make great products. And so if you can build a team of people who are, generally excited to do what they're doing and at work, and you can't get every day to be perfect and all the things that you do every day to be something you enjoy. But if in this totality you look back and go, I really had a good time this week, we had a lot of fun. That's the first step. And then the next is I try my best to make them as culturally diverse as possible, both in cultures and also in genders, so that we learn from everybody, that everyone brings a different perspective, and that makes an even stronger team and a better product. And so, like I said earlier about how when you're building out your teams and you're trying to figure out stuff, there are multiple layers, and what you are looking for, what you're hiring, how you're structuring pieces, because you can easily damage that. And so if you can build a team that works well together, and you can create an environment where they exceed and excel and they have a great time, and you surround them with a bunch of people that are not like them, they're all going to build and learn and grow together. And at the end, you're going to create an amazing product for your customers.
That's a word. I think we should end it there. But thank you so much, Charlie, for joining the call.
Thank you very much for having me.